And good evening, everyone, and welcome to the King Jordan Radio Show for Season 5, Episode 22. The date is February 23, 2017. Tonight on the show, we'll get into the Etan Patz case back from 79. Did the jury get it right? We'll discuss that. New York Jet Darrelle Revis is charged. We'll discuss that. We'll also get into Owen Labrie. He wants a new trial. We'll also get into Robert Durst. So a good show for you in the next 40 minutes or so. Tonight we are honored and privileged to be joined with a CNN and HLN legal analyst, as well as a New York defense attorney. It is my great pleasure to bring back to the program the one and only, making his return, Joey Jackson joins us. Good evening, Joey. How are you? Welcome back to the show.
I am fabulous, King. I'm thankful to be here, and I always love your introductory music. It's the best. You have some style and taste, let me tell you.
I'm sorry, Miss Jackson.
It's
That's
great.
not related to you, is it?
You know, unfortunately, that's something that I say all too often. I better shape up my act. I'm saying sorry, Miss Jackson, to my wife all too often lately. So. Just kidding,
okay,
dear.
so
Just kidding.
No question. Okay, so we had the Etan Patz case covered by. This was the second trial. Here's a snippet of what went down, and then I'd like to get your take on something. So here is the jury and some cuts about the case.
City kidnapping that commanded the attention of the entire country. Now, decades after his death, there is finally justice for Etan Patz and his family. Good evening. I'm Christine Johnson.
And I'm Maurice Dubois. Tonight, we're hearing from the jurors about what led them to their guilty verdict. CBS 2's Tony Aiello has more on the conviction. He is live in Soho, in the neighborhood where little Etan disappeared 38 years ago. Tony?
Maurice, Pedro Hernandez told police he was 18 years old when he lured Etan Patz into the basement of this building, choked the boy, put his body in a box, and left the box in the trash. At trial in 2015, 11 jurors believed that confession. This time around, the verdict was unanimous. He'd be 44 years old now, but Etan Patz is forever the little boy with the shaggy hair and the sweet smile.
But we finally have found some measure of justice for our wonderful little boy, Etan.
Stan Patz said the overwhelming emotion was relief after a jury convicted Pedro Hernandez of killing little Etan in the spring of 1979.
We approached it logically and compassionately.
Jurors in the retrial deliberated over 9 days. One called the process
ultimately kind of heartbreaking.
A word that sums up so much about the Patz case. Etan vanished in Soho on the very first day he was allowed to walk by himself to the bus stop.
We think an adult could have convinced him to come with him.
Back then, Stan and Julie Patz never suspected deli worker Pedro Hernandez. Over the years, suspicion fell on sex offender Jose Ramos, and briefly in 2012 on local handyman Othniel Miller. That year, investigators dug up a Soho basement to search for clues. The news coverage prompted a Hernandez relative to contact police to say Hernandez told multiple people he'd killed a child in New York. Hernandez told cops the child was Etan.
I felt like something just took over me, and I just choked him.
The jury rejected defense arguments that Hernandez was delusional and coerced into confessing.
We think that he could tell right from wrong. He could tell fantasy from reality. So really, that was a red herring.
At her home in South Jersey, Hernandez's wife, Rosemary, refused comment. His defense promises an appeal.
I hate to say it, but we're confident we'll be back here someday.
For Stan Patz, it's today that matters.
I am truly relieved, and I'll tell you, it's about time. It really is. It's about time.
The small memorial here includes flowers from a juror in the first trial with a note reading, "Justice has been served." Pedro Hernandez faces 25 years to life when he is sentenced on February 28th. Live in Soho, Tony Aiello, CBS 2 News.
Okay, Tony, for people who lived in that neighborhood, the verdict brought back memories of what Soho was like in 1979. The CBS 2's Dick Brennan reports Etan's disappearance changed everything.
And you saw that face, and, you could imagine how awful it is for that family.
New Yorkers who lived in Soho remember what the prosecution called one of the city's oldest and most painful unsolved crimes, the disappearance of Etan Patz. Michael Schmutzer raised 5 kids here with the specter of fear sweeping the city.
I remember at that time you had posters of Etan Patz all over the area in all the shops, and they were looking for their kid for many years to come.
When Etan walked off to school and disappeared forever, it triggered a new awareness of child abduction.
I think it was a national freakout, and for good reason. And I don't think this case, the fact that this man was convicted, brings any kind of closure to it.
Etan's disappearance also started a national movement that changed both policing and parenting.
It was a completely different world, and in some part, it's different today because of Etan Patz. I mean, kids don't play outside. Parents keep an eagle eye on them.
Lisa Cohen is the author of After Etan, the missing child case that held America captive.
After Etan, there was a world in which something like this could happen to your child, and once that idea crept into your head, you could never banish it.
Even though the city has gotten much nicer, parents say you still can't let your kids out of your sight. By the way, Etan Patz would have been 44 years old today. In Soho, Dick Brennan, CBS 2 News.
Okay, Joey, he would have been 44, as you heard. But on this particular case, I know you've been covering it. Do you believe that the jury got it right, A, and if so, why?
Well, let me say this. I mean, look, we live in an imperfect system of justice, and in living in that imperfect system, the reality is that we never know, right? Jurors do the best they can to get it right, and the standard of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. I give them a lot of credit because, remember, the jurors were there every day, right? And they were doing the best they can under difficult circumstances. We should also remind viewers that the first jury that tried the case, after listening to months of testimony, they hung. But we should also let the, not viewers, but listeners know that they hung 11-1. Now, we know that you need 12 jurors unanimously in a criminal proceeding to establish guilt or to vote not guilty. And the 11-1, there was one single solitary holdout which prevented a guilty verdict the first time. And he took, that single juror, a lot of heat. And the heat he took was from many people who felt that he was wrong, that they did get it right. And, it's one of these things, I'll say this in this case, we should also remind people that there was another suspect. His name was Jose Ramos. Now, Jose Ramos, a sex offender who is doing time now in Philadelphia, Jose Ramos was determined to have been responsible civilly for the death of Etan Patz. And, in fact, there was a civil proceeding, and that civil proceeding, different standard of proof, sure. Criminal proceedings are beyond a reasonable doubt. Civil proceedings are by a preponderance of the evidence. Is it more likely than not? But there was a conclusion that by a preponderance of the evidence, more likely than not, Jose Ramos was the one who actually did it. And so that verdict was just upset a couple of years ago, which allowed Pedro Ramos to be prosecuted in the first place. But you never can tell, right? What happened where you had someone, another person, being found responsible, again, not criminally, but civilly, and now you have an entirely different person who is now held accountable. And so it begs the question. I think the defense certainly were trying to establish that the confessions that Pedro Ramos made to the police should not be believed, that he had a low IQ, that he knew not what he did, that he didn't mean to confess, that he was taken advantage of, that he was pressured, that he was coerced. And ultimately the jury didn't buy that. I think what they did buy, however, was his proximity, that is Pedro Ramos' proximity to Etan Patz at the time that it occurred. The fact that he was working at the bodega, that he was able to strangle him and hide the body, etc. And I think they were also, that is the jury, persuaded by the many statements that Pedro Ramos made that were not to the police. recall that he made statements to family members and even his wife that he had done something tragic and that he had killed this boy. And so, it's an astounding victory for the prosecution because you don't have any physical evidence, and particularly in a day and age, King, where you live in a CSI Miami society, right? Everybody wants DNA and hair fibers and samples and blood serology. You didn't have that here, but yet and still there was a conviction. So did they get it right? I don't know. But we would hope that our system of justice, while not infallible, it's the best one we have, and they did the best they could under the circumstances, and so I'm willing to live with their decision.
And do you remember back in 2005 when the John Bonet case was going a little stronger, and some guy came out and said he did it, and then they later proved that he wasn't the guy that did it? Do you remember there was a statement? So I guess this could have been like a similar situation with John Bonet. Remember that?
Right. It's interesting. Again, we don't know. Ultimately, people say a lot of things, and it's a question of credibility. Do you believe them? Do you not? But in this case, where you had A, a confession to the police, B, multiple family members saying that he had confessed at a previous time, including someone from the clergy who said that, he said that he had killed this little boy, I think that was not lost upon the jury. And, give them credit. They listened to 4 months of testimony, and they rendered a unanimous conclusion. So, according to them, he's guilty. And that's our system of justice.
And he would have been 44. That would cases about 44 years old. And how is that odd to see a case, that is so old be taken care of? Does that happen often in the justice system?
It does not happen. As you know, though, King, we have a cold case squad, and we have cold case squads throughout the country that really look to, and, you give credit to police and tireless detectives who try to put things together and try. I hate to use the word closure because if you lose a family member, I don't know that there's ever closure, but they try to bring some resolution to families. And if you look at cold case squads throughout the country, they do their level best to get it right. And the wheels of justice move, but they move ever so slowly. I had a case involving a defendant who was convicted of murder, and it was 12 years after the fact. He was apprehended. They had no physical evidence at all, but they had compelling circumstantial evidence that put him at the scene, that talked about his history with the victim in the case, who happened to be his baby's mother, and they established motive, and they just put it together. And so often in these cold cases, you rely upon statements made, you rely upon witnesses who put a person there at the time, you rely upon those witnesses to talk about what the behavior was. Oftentimes you rely upon the defendant's own words. And I think that was something that was very persuasive in this particular case, and they compelled the jury to a unanimous conclusion that he was guilty. And so, did they get it right? You never know. But what you do know is that you trust and respect the system that we have, and it's an awful, awful difficult lift to get 12 people to see anything the same way. And so the fact that they did is not lost on me, and so I just would, respect their judgment.
No question about it. Okay, Owen Labrie wants to get a new trial. Here is the details.
There's some new developments in the Owen Labrie case. He is the former student at an elite prep school who was convicted of sexually assaulting a classmate. Now he's asking for a new trial, claiming his original defense team dropped the ball. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is in Concord, New Hampshire. Gabe, good morning to you.
Matt, good morning. This case drew national headlines because it exposed what critics said was a disturbing culture at one of the nation's most elite prep schools. But Owen Labrie has always maintained that the encounter was consensual. And now he's asking for a second chance to face a jury.
So are you hopeful to get a new trial?
This morning, Owen Labrie is back in court asking for a new trial and arguing that his previous legal team failed him during the case that rocked one of the country's most elite prep schools with dramatic testimony from the underage accuser.
I was raped. I was violated in so many ways.
I do.
Labrie's local attorney, Jay Rancourt, now taking the witness stand and claiming the 21-year-old's former high-profile lawyer, Jay Carney, was unprepared to cross-examine key experts.
That was possibly the most terrifying moment of my legal career.
Labrie was acquitted in 2015 of raping a 15-year-old classmate at New Hampshire's St. Paul's School as part of a ritual known as the Senior Salute, where older students asked out younger ones before graduation, sometimes for sex. He maintained he never had intercourse with his accuser.
It wouldn't have been a good move to have sex with this girl.
Guilty.
Labrie was convicted of misdemeanor sexual assault and child endangerment, as well as a felony computer charge that requires him to register as a sex offender for life. That wasn't enough for his accuser, Chessie Prout, who revealed her identity in an exclusive interview with Savannah last summer.
They said that they didn't believe that he did it knowingly. And that frustrated me a lot because he definitely did do it knowingly.
Labrie now claims his previous lawyers failed to challenge the felony charge of using a computer to lure a minor for sex. His new lawyers argue that the conversations took place over the campus intranet, not the worldwide internet, a critical difference that Labrie's lead attorney, Jay Carney, never brought up in court. In court documents responding to Labrie's claims, Carney wrote, "I don't consider myself to be knowledgeable about internet communications," going on to say, "I did not hire an expert to investigate this subject because it never occurred to me that it was an issue to explore." The local attorney now says she did not see the red flags at the time.
Looking back on it as a whole, I would say no. I wish I had done more.
Not only is Labrie asking for a new trial, he's also appealing his convictions to the state's Supreme Court. Matt and Willie, this hearing is set to continue for several more days. Back to you.
All right, Gabe, thank you very much.
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our...
Okay, Joey, obviously nobody wants to be on that sex offenders list. You probably can't get a job, get an apartment when you get older, et cetera, et cetera. But with this in mind, do you think he has a shot with the stuff he's raising in terms of what the other ex-attorney did not include?
Well, here's the problem, King. The problem is that ineffective assistance of counsel, which is the essence of the claim, is a claim that is often used by people who get convicted. It's the most commonly framed, the most commonly used argument by those who are convicted, and it's also the most widely rejected, right? My lawyer was terrible, my lawyer was bad, my lawyer didn't do his research, my lawyer was unprepared. So it's something that's common. So the standard is did you fall so far below as an attorney the threshold and standard of care that a reasonable lawyer would have taken to defend you, such that a court could examine it and say, you know what, sure, you did. So that's the critical analysis here, and that's a tough claim. But I am persuaded by the whole argument about the computer conviction, because there is a distinction. If the statute says the internet, but it was communication that was done on the school system, that's something that certainly the attorney should have pointed out, and I think that that's very persuasive to me that the attorneys that he had didn't follow up on that. I mean, the most minimum amount of research would have uncovered that legal issue, and that is that there's a distinction between doing research on an internet and doing it in a school campus environment where it's the intranet. And so that's an egregious violation. But, look, attorneys do their best. That's one such claim that he's making. The other is just his lack of preparation. But it's a very high threshold for that to be established to a judge's satisfaction in order to award a new trial. And that's the biggest problem I think Labrie has here.
And, of course, a couple of years ago, we saw O.J. Simpson use that tactic to try to get out of the Vegas situation that he was in. When
Some
he
good
claimed,
it did him, huh?
Right. I guess that didn't work out so well. But I guess the attorney didn't said words to the effect, maybe I could have looked. Is there a way of, taking a sword to your client sometimes and
I think
saying
so.
things?
I think attorneys absolutely do that. They're willing, and
right.
It's a delicate balance between you sacrificing your reputation and otherwise allowing the client to have a new crack at it. But ultimately, the judge is going to make an objective decision about whether the attorney did enough and did he fall beyond the standard of care such that a new trial is warranted. And that's going to be the big issue here.
But what about the people at home that are watching this particular attorney that's in this statement? If they're in trouble in the past and they say to themselves, well, he took the sword for this guy. If I'm ever in trouble, maybe the attorney speaking that. Is that a possibility?
Well, here's the problem with that. The big problem is as follows. You know, most people, when they hire a criminal defense lawyer, they want to be acquitted, right? They don't want to think about...
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, they don't want to think about, well, if I lose, you know, will my attorney support me and will my attorney make the argument and fall on a sword for me, right? So the bottom line is when people are in the worst predicaments of their life and they're accused of something that's really egregious, the issue is, you know, is my attorney up to the task? Will they do the best they can under difficult circumstances to fend for my interest? And I think that, you know, as a lawyer, a reputation is probably, I mean, that's the biggest thing you ever have is your reputation. Right. And so, you know, these ineffective assistance of counsel claims are kind of tough because now you're really tinkering with the reputation of a lawyer, saying that they weren't prepared, they didn't do as much as they could do, they didn't do their research, they were not adequately defending your interest at the time. And so it's, you know, that's a major claim to lose. But I should also note, you know, you made the analogy before, and you made the analogy with John Bonet. If you might remember, Mickey Sherman is an attorney in Connecticut, and he was involved, right? You remember the case involving one of the Kennedys, and he was determined to have been involved in an ineffective assistance of counsel, and that was years later. In fact, it was just, I believe, last year where a higher court said, no, Mickey Sherman, he did the absolute right thing. And so sometimes years later you receive vindication because initially when they determined that Mickey Sherman got it wrong, it was a huge decision, and the judge trashed him in that decision. And an appellate court later said, no, I think Mickey Sherman did the right thing. And I raise that to you just to say again that the threshold standard for getting an ineffective assistance of counsel claim passed is just so very high. And so it's an often used claim, but it's also a claim that's rejected the majority of the time.
Absolutely, and we'll see what happens. What is your prediction? Or you don't want to predict?
I'm always loath to predict because you never can tell, you know, ultimately what's going to happen. But I think that, you know, certainly there are very viable issues that are raised here. And I think that, you know, on balance, particularly with that intranet issue, it raises a significant concern for me. The issue is, will it be enough for a judge to grant him a new trial? That's going to be the real linchpin to whether he gets a new trial or not. So.
Okay, Darrelle Revis to the Jets is being charged. Here's some audio courtesy of ESPN.
Altercation that witnesses say left two men unconscious, according to Pittsburgh police, at around 2:45 a.m. Now, two men told the police they were punched by Revis amid a verbal altercation early Sunday. Revis required medical attention. His attorney, Blaine Jones, told ESPN he declined to reveal the nature and severity of any issues. Jones said Revis will turn himself in to police rather soon. A Jet spokesman said the team is aware of the incident and has spoken to Revis but had no further comment. Stephen A., what's your reaction to
My reaction is that this is one of the most bogus criminal stories I've ever heard in my life. Let's pump the brakes on this a little bit. Let's take into account the fact that we are talking about Darrelle Revis, who is not a lawless individual, has never been in any kind of trouble whatsoever. This guy, one of the smartest businessmen in the NFL. This is an individual that is engaging in a real estate project. I know people sit there and say 2:30 in the morning, what's he doing now? He's hanging out. He wasn't at some nightclub. He went to the real estate property that he is investing in because he doesn't want to be there in the daytime when a bunch of people are around. So two men see him it's on the record that they ultimately approached him, okay? And so what happens is we're hearing about felony charges, theft. Do y'all realize that the theft that they're talking about is some dude is saying that Darrelle Revis took his cell phone? That's theft. So let me get this straight. Why does Darrelle Revis need your cell phone? Because he probably didn't want you taking pictures of him. He probably didn't want you harassing him and whatever. Now, I'm not going to sit up there and act like I was there. I don't know all intricate details. But what I will say is this. You're sitting up there and you're bothering somebody with your cell phone cameras and all of that stuff. And everybody want to be a photographer. That's the worst thing. It's the worst invention ever as far as I'm concerned is cell phone cameras. There is no privacy anymore, whatever the case may be. And that's
someone's talking from personal experience.
I'm talking from personal experience.
Put the phone down.
The only difference between me and him is that I may have refrained from punching somebody in the face because I'm allergic to being arrested and going to jail.
Though?
Excuse me?
Have you been tempted?
Have I been tempted?
To punch
somebody. I'm tempted every day.
Every
day. I mean,
what would Mama say?
Mama didn't raise you that way, Stephen. But the point is that, this is what they're talking about is news. And so what I want to caution everybody that hears this news about Darrelle Revis, we have to wait until all the facts come out. But chances are this NFL star, in the midst of a 5-year, $70 million contract, all right, that's due to get a $2 million sign-in bonus, who has always been about his money, he ain't trying to end up in the news or the police blotters, knowing that it could potentially compromise millions. I'm willing to bet my check that somebody instigated something with them. And by the way, this stuff with terroristic threats and all. I said the police need to stop. Come modify these damn charges. Yeah. He probably said, I want to bust you, or whatever. Oh, my God, he threatened them. Felony. Give me a break.
Reportedly, when they woke up, they gave some statements.
Okay, Joey, what is your take on this latest with Darrelle Revis, Jetstar?
Well, I think that I think the esteemed Stephen A. Has a point here in many ways, and I won't repeat or echo his precise sentiments. But what I will say is that the story gets even worse from a prosecution perspective of him when now they're suggesting, and again, I don't know the facts, I wasn't there either, but there's something that has come to the forefront now where the cell phone video has audio, and there's someone on the audio allegedly bragging about knocking the people out who were knocked out and punched, who doesn't sound at all like Darrelle Revis' voice. And so that adds another layer of complication of whether he was the one who actually hit anybody. And in fact, there's an issue as to whether or not the people who were hit could identify him as the person who actually hit them, or was he just a person who was there? And so, so that's a problem. The other issue is, again, when you see charges about theft and, conspiracy and terroristic threats and whatever the other one is, robbery, it is a cell phone, right? So it just begs the question of what really happened here. Do celebrities oftentimes get upset when their pictures are taken, and do they make an effort to take the phone away? Yes, we've heard stories about that. Did that happen in this case? I don't know. But can we really charge someone with all of that for not wanting their picture taken, if that is the case, and if it was even him who assaulted them, and if it was even him who said anything of a negative variety to them? So there's a lot of questions surrounding the story. But it sounds to me, just on first blush, to be something that is significantly overcharged, overblown, and until I get factually something more, I'm just very cautious and skeptical of the story. And again, if character counts for anything, there's a number of celebrities that you might read about and hear about who, potentially are not doing the right thing. He's not one that you hear ripping and running and, in clubs and knocking people out and, engaging in that type of behavior. His years in New York, they've been stellar, both on the field and off the field. So I just don't get this, and I'm certainly not ready to bury him based upon the limited, conflicting, and rather weak evidence so far that's been in the public domain.
Yeah, I totally agree, and it seems to get weirder. There were people that know Darrelle and didn't have a stake in this that said that's definitely not his voice that I heard say. Do you think if this goes further, those people will testify?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's what you need. You need to get people who, first of all, eyewitnesses will testify if there are any at that hour of the morning, 2:30, as to what, if anything, they saw. Right. What, if anything, they saw. There may or may not be any other surveillance that was in the area. That'll be investigated. There may or may not have been any other picture takers or video camera takers or regular camera takers that were in the area. And I think that, he may or may not have a lot to say about exactly what happened. And so, ultimately, until there's any type of indictment, I'm just very weary about these charges as they're constituted right now, because it just seems so strange. Not only because it's not in keeping with who he is. Everyone, I won't say everyone, but many people, may step out of their character box every now and then. But just based on the facts, in addition to him being a good guy, based on the facts as I know them, and the most compelling fact being a video saying, I knocked him out, and it's not his voice, to me that seems to be pretty compelling evidence. And I think an expert would be able to identify who that was or who that wasn't on that tape in terms of the voice.
Okay, let's go to our final story. Robert Durst is a witness.
A witness who claims real estate millionaire Robert Durst confessed to killing his wife is going back on the stand today. Durst faces first-degree murder charges in the execution-style shooting of his friend Susan Berman in Los Angeles in 2000. Prosecutors say he killed her because she knew too much about the disappearance of his wife, Kathleen. She vanished in 1982. Durst is not facing charges in that case, which remains unsolved. He has pleaded not guilty to killing Susan Berman. Jonathan Hunt is live in L.A., and this is a mystery. When you talk to people from L.A., they know all the details of this case.
Yep, they certainly do, Harris. It's captured the imagination, and obviously this has been very dramatic testimony this week. The witness is Nick Chavin. He was a very good friend of Robert Durst, a very good friend of Durst's wife, Kathleen, and a very good friend of Susan Berman. And he says that at a dinner back in 2014, he was with Robert Durst, and Durst told him directly he did indeed kill his friend Susan Berman. Chavin said on the stand that Durst told him, quote, I had to. It was her or me. I had no choice. And he went on, this is a best friend who admitted to killing my other best friend. Chavin also bolstered the prosecution claim that Durst killed Berman because she knew too much about the disappearance of his wife, Kathy. Chavin related a conversation he had with Berman. Quote, she said, Bob killed Kathy. I asked, how do you know that? She said, he told me. Our sources, Harris, told us before this all started it was going to be sensational. It has proven to be exactly that this week, Harris.
So why was the identity, Jonathan, of this witness kept secret for so long?
Well, quite simply, Harris, because the witness, Nick Chavin, and prosecutors believed that his life was in danger, that Robert Durst might have him killed. Listen to prosecutor John Lewin here.
That man kills witnesses. That's what he does. So if there's any doubt, if there's any question as to what our theory is, it's that Mr. Durst, when pushed into a corner, he murders people.
And worth noting, Harris, that Nick Chavin came into court with 2 armed bodyguards who we understand are with him 24 hours a day since his identity was made public. Just another extraordinary moment in what is and continues to be an extraordinary case against Robert Durst. Harris?
Wow. Jonathan Hunt, thank you. Good to see you.
Okay, Joey, we know he was acquitted in 2003 of a different case, and he's been lucky on that one. And do you think he's going to – what do you think of Robert Durst, what happened with him with the previous case, and now how it applies to this current case?
Well, listen, everything that someone does, first of all, I think, he strikes me, again, not to be judgmental, but as kind of, not the most normal person that I've ever observed or otherwise, encountered. So he does strike me as not the typical individual.
Why would you go on an HBO show if, just stay out of the spotlight, if you're in that situation?
He seems to be a bizarre individual. Having said that, look, every case is judged on the facts of that independent case, having nothing to do with any other case. And so, to me, the issue is, do they have the goods on him? I am always reluctant to place my stock in any one witness and what they say. I mean, what if this particular witness who's saying he told me so, is fabricating it? So to me, I need more than someone coming in and saying he told me so. As much as I don't think, Durst is the most normal individual on the planet, I also would be reluctant to, lock the door and throw away the key based on someone saying he told me he did it. I just have an issue with that. I just need more, because what if that person has an axe to grind? What if that person was a friend but is no longer a friend? What if that person wants to bury me? It just needs to be more evidence, and so that concerns me quite a bit. And in terms of the witness statement that we heard saying this is what he does, he murders people, I don't know that we can place stock in that either. He was acquitted.
Isn't that kind of like hearsay?
It is, sort of. And I just don't. You can't. When you say he murders people, well, is he a convicted murderer? He's an accused murderer. People think that he has dirty hands. His hands are not clean based on some things that he's been involved in. And of course, his neighbor, he admitted. Yeah, absolutely. And his neighbor, he admitted he killed him and dismembered him. He admitted it, but he got off. A jury determined that it was self-defense, and so I think. You have to be careful when you deem someone a murderer when they actually have not been convicted of that crime. And so I think the prosecutors have a long way to go in order to make their case. And if they can make it with more than just one witness, then, hey, more power to them. But that one person I'm not persuaded by.
Yeah, and they need more, you're saying, the prosecution to convict him, right?
Absolutely. I just need more in the way of evidence. I need more evidence. I need to know, the mean, the motive, the opportunity. I want to know who the eyewitnesses are, what they saw, what they observed, what they heard. Was he there? What was his behavior that day, the day after, the week after? I just need a lot more than someone said, yeah, I was at a party and he told me he did it. What if either A, that's not true, or B, it is true, but he wasn't telling the truth? A lot of people boast and they say things and whatever that turn out not to be the case. So I just need more. And if they could provide more, then I'm willing to listen. But at this point, I think they have some work to do to establish his guilt.
Does the jury get to know about the past alleged crimes that he was found not guilty of?
Those are going to be the subjects of pretrial proceedings, and ultimately, it'll be up to a judge to decide whether or not to allow bad acts in as evidence, meaning, anything you did in the past, should it be allowed to come in? On the one hand, everything that somebody does, while important, is somewhat prejudicial, right? Because I have to be judged upon what I'm being accused of today, not what I did yesterday, last week, last month, or last year. So his attorneys will argue that it's prejudicial to let in prior instances of misconduct because the jury is going to evaluate him not on what he's accused of doing now, but what he did yesterday, the day before, the week before. On the other hand, prosecutors would be in a position to admit that evidence if it goes to motive, if it goes to intent, if it goes to a common plan or scheme, the MO. And so it's a balancing test that the judge will have to engage in to determine whether to allow this jury to hear instances and evidence of his prior misconduct and weird behavior.
Okay, just a couple of calls, and then we'll let you go. Let's welcome back Sarah Kardashian, calling out of Cali. Sarah, good evening, and welcome to the King Jordan Radio Show. You're live with Joey Jackson.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, Joey. It's been a long time.
Hi.
I'm so happy to have been able to listen to the show tonight. Just a couple of things. As far as Etan Patz is concerned, just with a mother's perspective, I am so glad that there is some justice in this case. I do have one question, Joey. Because Jose Ramos was found responsible civilly, and now Pedro Hernandez has been found guilty criminally, what happens to the civil case as far as Mr. Ramos is concerned? Is he still considered responsible civilly if now we have a guilty verdict in criminal court?
First of all, Sarah, it's always a pleasure to hear your voice and for you to be on the program and for me to get to talk to you. You are a wonderful
Joey.
human being. Well, it's the truth. That you're a wonderful human being, and I think if society had, multiple more people like you, boy, would we live in a place that is far different than we live in now. Having said that, I think it's an excellent question, and what that question was answered by a court, because what ended up happening, Sarah, is that Ramos being found criminally responsible, again, not guilty, but criminally responsible, just for our listeners, the judge ultimately vacated that decision in order to allow Pedro, exactly. So Pedro Hernandez ended up going on trial, and when that happened, the judge, in order to allow that to happen, upset that verdict, the civil verdict, and ultimately overturned it. There was a judgment and an award over $1 million on the case, which the family never collected, of course. He was judgment-proof, didn't have any money. But once they identified the new killer, quote-unquote, that judgment, civil judgment, was disturbed, vacated, and otherwise taken off the books to allow the criminal prosecution to go forward. But it just speaks to the infallibility of our system, right? Or the lack thereof. It's
right.
Interesting because, right, nothing's perfect, right? So the fact is that, how can you find somebody civilly liable and then convict someone, criminally in the case? It's disturbing, but ultimately that question was answered because the judge undid the verdict, civil verdict.
Oh, okay. Because of course you can only have one person guilty of this particular crime. Well, thank you, Joey, for that. Now, one other question about this interesting witness for Robert Durst. I'm curious, and maybe Jordan can shed more light on this. If he heard Durst tell him these things in 2014, does anyone know when he came forward? Has the DA been holding this in since 2014, or did he just come forward? I mean, that's curious to me, as well as the fact that how can he buttress this statement without any backing up? I'm surprised.
That's a beautiful question, and I'm sure the answer to that will come out during the course of the proceeding when he's cross-examined, and they ask him the question. By the way, sir, you mentioned at a party in 2014, did you call the police? Did you go to the police? Did you tell a neighbor? Did you file a report? What action, if any, did you take in or around that time, or are you just telling it now? So I don't know the answer to that question, but I'm sure that that's going to weigh very heavily on the defense team's mind, and you're going to hear an answer to that question ultimately. But you focus and you put your thumb on the critical issue, which is what's the proximity of time that he went. And obviously it would make it much more credible if that night, he filed a report, or the day after, or he called someone who he did something and just didn't walk into a court and testify in 2017. Hey, by the way, there was a party 3 years ago. Yeah, as a matter of fact. So you're absolutely right about that. Raises concern.
I was driving to work the morning of his verdict in Texas. And here I am driving, and I'd been following the trial so closely, and when I heard them say not guilty, I almost went through a red light. I was so, I mean, I slammed the brakes on, but I was so shocked that they really believed him, that it was self-defense. I was shocked. That's all I can say. Anyway, I'll let you take more calls. Always a pleasure, Joey. Always a pleasure, Jordan. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sarah.
Pleasure's mine. God bless, Sarah.
Okay.
Take care now, okay?
Let's go to Mary. I don't know where she's calling from, but Mary is on the line. Good evening, Mary. You're live with Joey and Jordan on King Jordan Radio. Hi.
Hi, Jordan, and hi, Joey. I'm in Mars today. I'm calling from Hawaii.
Wonderful.
Aloha.
How's Hawaii? Boy, I wish I was in Hawaii.
Yeah, well, come on down anytime. I wanted to talk on the Owen Labrie case, and to use your word, Joey, what a conundrum, because whether it's internet or intranet or extranet, it's still an online computer.
Absolutely.
Once a private server and once a public server. This guy went on his email, which you can either have it on a private server or a public server, and talked about what he had done and how he had his conquest and his whole bit. And is he gonna get off because of this little technicality, because the law hasn't caught up with the computer lingo? And the other thing is, I've been listening to the whole trial, and I don't really believe that the defense has met the burden, or I don't know, the judge decides that the previous counsel were ineffective. Really, I think they were pretty good, considering. And the other thing is, Joey, can you explain to us? I mean, she was 13, he was 18. The law in New Hampshire says, I mean, she was 15. It has to be 16. So she wasn't even of the age to consent for sexual contact. Whether it was consensual or not, she didn't have the age to consent, period. I don't understand.
No, that's absolutely right. But remember that he was found not guilty of the rape charge. They did convict him on the sexual assault charge. The misdemeanor charge, he got a year in jail.
So what's the difference? What's the difference between a simple assault? They found him guilty of misdemeanor, but not felony. What's the difference?
Right.
I know one is heavier.
Yeah. Well, just in a global sense, let me say that oftentimes the distinction lies in penetration, just, to be frank. And it varies by state. But a rape generally is non-consensual intercourse, wherein sexual assault could be predicated upon gratifying yourself with regard to touching various places of anatomy which are not consensual. And so just in general, in a global sense, so that the listeners understand, and it's defined differently in different jurisdictions, but rape, as we all know it, is generally involving a penetration, whereas a sexual assault, would involve just gratification by touching private areas, without invitation to do so. But it differs, depending upon the state in which you live.
Okay. Well, and for me equally, it's just a pleasure every time I talk to you, Joey, and I always call in for Jordan's show. I enjoy the show tremendously. Wish you guys a great evening, and I'll see you guys next time.
Mary, you are fabulous. Enjoy Hawaii. Please know how jealous we are of you, and you are a wonderful human being. Okay?
Thanks so much, Mary. We appreciate it. And Joey, we appreciate you coming on. You're an amazing guest. You're so intriguing to watch on HLN. It's like when I'm watching you, my eyes are glued. Like when you're watching a good movie, you explain things so well. You really bring it home when you're on TV. You're doing a great job, and I you know what? Maybe you don't want to say it, but I think it's about time that you do have your own show. That's just my opinion. And my other thing I wanted to ask you is, did you see the Super Bowl, and what did you think of the comeback, if you did?
Well, two things. I'm grateful for your kind words. I very much appreciate that. I really do. And please know that you're doing wonderful work, too. And so, just continue to do the fine job that you do, and I'm grateful to join you whenever I can and however I can. So thanks for the opportunity to be with you. That's number one. But I'm grateful. Thank you. On the issue of the Super Bowl, I guess I can just tell you, yes, of course, I saw the Super Bowl, and no, I could not believe what I saw unfold before my very eyes. Atlanta had that game. I could not believe. I could not believe how they just fell apart. I just don't. I'm stammering and stuttering because I just cannot fathom for the life of me how they let it get away. But let me give the New England Patriots credit. They kept their poise, and as many people who may love or hate Tom Brady, give him credit. He had an opportunity. He seized the moment, and he just did a wonderful job bringing his team back. And everybody did their job, and they did it effectively, and they brought home a victory in New England. So God bless.
They had to make those 2-point conversions twice. Everything had to go right for New England, and everything pretty much had to go wrong for Atlanta, which it did. So that was pretty amazing.
Exactly, which it did. It was unbelievable.
But I'll take you back 10 years ago when the Giants upset New England. To me, in my lifetime, that was probably the best Super Bowl that I watched. That was a couple weeks ago.
Incredible. With the cast on the hat,
it was the best comeback.
That was incredible. That was dynamite. Man, that was good. But I just can't believe this happened. But you know what? Give them credit. He avenged Deflategate. He did what he needed to do, and he brought home a victory. So, amen to that.
Would you put him past Joe Montana?
I would. At this point, I would. I really would.
Wow.
He did it. And I think he's got the most Super Bowls now. He's just an incredible human being, so God bless him. Let me give him his credit.
Okay, so when can the audience see you on television next?
Well, I usually, my schedule now is they can look for me between 1 and 3 during the week. I generally have the pleasure of joining Erica Hill, who's an unbelievable anchor for HLN. Very talented.
Absolutely.
She does a great job, and more importantly, she's a fabulous human being. So I'm usually privileged enough to be with her, multiple times during the week in the 1 to 3. And then, of course, I'm working a lot with Ashley, who has the new show taking over Nancy Grace's spot. She's just been doing a phenomenal job with that, recovering crime stories. She's an outstanding journalist. Right? So at 8 p.m., right, Eastern Standard Time. And so, generally nowadays with Trump Mania on CNN and generally the coverage of his first 100 days, it's my pleasure to be working with some great people at HLN. So that's where they can find me,
Is there any chance that you're going to run for president in 2020?
Not even close. Not 2020, not 2024, none of the above. So
that would be too much on your plate. I would vote for you.
What do they say? If asked, I will not serve. If asked, I will not run. If elected, I will not serve. Whatever that saying goes. But that's a tough job, man. I'm telling you. So.
Thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate every time you come on the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you, my good man. God bless and you take care, okay?
Have a good one. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Ken. You too. Bye-bye now. God bless. Bye-bye.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, that was a great show with the intelligent Joey Jackson as we went over the Etan Patz case. Very informative news we got there. We went over Darrelle Revis. Very informative. Owen, can't pronounce the name right. We went over that. Very interesting. And Robert Durst. These are great cases. If you want to hear it again, of course, you could listen to us on iTunes, on Stitcher Radio, of course. But I really want to thank Joey Jackson for coming on. He's an amazing, amazing person and an amazing guest. Also want to give a shout-out to Doreen, who is helping me, who posted some stuff, Mary, Maddie, and Pager. So I do want it to play for you, Solita, and one other song before we go. Good night, everybody. We'll stay tuned to King Jordan Radio on the Facebook page for the next time and the next guest. So here's Selena, and then we'll come back with another song, and then we'll call it a night.